Hello, everyone. So today we're going to go over the chapter 8, a chapter on organizational culture, structure, and design. So there are two main portions of this chapter. The first one that deals with org culture, and the second that deals with org structure. So the two of them together help understand how to design an organization. What are the elements that go in determining what kind of design your organization should or should not have. So let's start with the first one, organizational culture, right? So organizational culture are, as it suggests, shared assumptions that affect how work gets done. A lot of times, CEOs or upper management or leaders are looking to figure out what is the culture of the organization. So when they are talking about the culture of an organization, they're pretty much looking at what are the common ways people behave, or what are the shared assumptions that affect people in my organization, the way they deal with conflict, or the way they deal with ethics, or any of those different concepts that are part of management or managerial functions. So that's pretty much what organizational culture is about. So let's look at what all comprise organizational culture. What drives an organization's culture? Well, first thing that drives an organization's culture predominantly is going to be founders' value. And it is really important to understand that, especially for startups, the founder is a very big part of why the company came into existence and how the company came into existence. So if you look carefully, Uber as a company till 2017 has had a very particular kind of culture, marked very specifically by the founder's values and the founder's personality. What kind of industry this particular organization is in, a company or an organization that's in a healthcare industry will have a very different culture than an organization that it's in manufacturing. So if you are to compare a hospital with a factory, very different culture because of industry that they're in. The national culture is going to affect whether the company's in US or China. What are the vision and strategies? And we've talked about that earlier. The mission and the vision and the strategies of the organization will have a big hand in developing its culture. And finally, the behavior of the leaders. How does the top brass role model for the company? What behaviors are modeled for the rest of the organization? If you see your leaders behaving a certain way, it gives you clues on how you are expected to behave as well. So here I have a picture of the founder of Patagonia. And so if you are interested in learning more about Patagonia's culture, which is a very unique culture, very different from most of the other companies that you may buy from or hear about, I have links at the bottom of this video. Feel free to pause the video and go click on those links and follow them and watch the videos that take you through Patagonia's unique culture. Do remember now, organizational culture is also sometimes called corporate cultures, right? Or corporate culture. So what are the different levels of culture? How do you know, what is culture? Well, at the very top level is the observable, right? What we are able to see very clearly about an organization at the most visible level. This is expressed in physical manifestations. So, how people dress, what awards the company engages in, what are the myths and stories about the company, what are the different rituals and ceremonies, how is the company decorated. So if you go and look at John Deere's headquarters, their building and the geography and where they're situated in their land, it gives a very unique idea to you about what the company stands for. That's what you can physically see. If you go into Google's campus, the campus gives you a very clear idea of observable culture of the company. But just like a national culture, observable culture is a very tip of the iceberg. Where does this observable culture come from? From explicitly stated values, all right? The values that are espoused by the company, the norms of the organization. Norms are expected average behavior that has been put forth by the founder, or that is espoused by the top management team. And where do these come from? Well, these come from core values of the organization, right? Basic values. And remember, level 1 is very easily observable. Level 2 may not be observable, but it's very clearly stated. It's the level 3 that's actually helping build level 2 and 1. And so level 3 are the core assumptions, core values. These are things that are taken for granted. And as a result, they're sometimes difficult to change as well. These are the very core basic values of the organization. The example would be that if there's an organization that's very, very conservative and believes in traditional family values, which means it believes very strongly in division of household labor. It might believe very strongly in men as breadwinners, and that might permeate throughout the organization. That's something that's really hard to change. And so these are the 3 levels of organization culture, or how culture is signified in the organization. So when we talk about culture, it's really important to also understand the different types, 4 types of organizational culture. So let's look at the 4 types of organizational culture. You have clan, autocracy, hierarchy, and market. If you look carefully, these 4 types of organizational cultures are actually on something called a competing values framework. The competing values framework provides a very practical way for managers to sort of understand, measure, and even change corporate culture. So the competing values framework, or the CVF, which has been validated by extensive research involving almost 1,100 companies, classifies organizational culture into 4 types: clan, autocracy, market, and hierarchy, right? So what are the 2 dimensions on which, or what are the 2 dimensions of the competing values on which these 4 types of organizations are structured around? So if you look from top to bottom, the vertical dimension of flexibility or stability, this dimension expresses the extent to which an organization prefers flexibility and discretion versus stability and control, right? So combining these 2 dimensions creates the 4 types of organizational culture based on different core values. What's the second one? Well, the horizontal dimension from left to right, which looks at focus of the organization. Is it inward or outward? Where is the organization focusing its attention and efforts? Is it towards internal dynamics and employees? Are we more focused on who we are, how we treat our employees, or are we focused on the external environment, which is customers, shareholders? What are we really focused on? And the combination of these 2, flexibility and discretion versus stability and control, and internal focus versus external focus, is what provides us these 4 distinct types of cultures. So what are these 4 distinct types of culture? The first one, clan culture. The clan culture is very similar. Well, it's tribal in a way, but so Chick-fil-A is a very good example. Clan culture is signified by very strong internal focus. They're very focused on people, on morale, encouraging flexibility and collaboration. On the other end of the spectrum is a hierarchical structure. The hierarchical structure is the main thrust is on control. And the reason is because there is a very strong internal focus. However, the focus is also on efficiency, stability, timeliness, smooth functioning. So a hierarchical structure will also probably show good process control measurements. Because in these structures, it's all about efficiency. How do we achieve efficiency? So you look at UPS, it's all about logistics. How do we get a package from point A to point B in under 48 hours? Or, if you look at Amazon's Prime shipping, a lot of times you get packages on the weekends, or you get 2-day Prime shipping. And UPS and USPS help Amazon achieve that. But these companies have to have a very strong hierarchical structure that helps them achieve efficiency and timeliness. Well, the next type of organizational culture, the autocracy, and Google is a very good example. Now, these two cultures that I'm talking about next are both externally focused. They're looking at competition. They're looking at customers. They're looking at markets. The autocracy culture is all about innovation, adaptability, and creativity, innovation, creativity. That's all autocracy culture is all about. These are the companies that are really focused on building cutting edge products or innovations, providing those. And Google is a good example. And the next kind, the final kind, is a market culture. Uber is a very good example of a market culture organization, because these organizations are very strongly focused on what the market is doing, the external environment. They're driven by competition and a very strong desire to deliver results. All right. And so productivity, customers, profits, they take precedence over employee development and satisfaction. So these companies might sometimes react fast to products and customers, but may be lagging behind in looking at employee satisfaction. Whereas client culture is so heavily inward focused that they might lose focus of the outside, the market revenue, market growth. And so each culture has very strong points or strengths, and each culture also has limitations. How does a company decide we want to be one or the other? It's all about going back to the drawing board, to your mission and vision, and who you are, and what do you want to achieve as a company, and what kind of people do you have, and what kind of culture do you already have. That will really help determine what kind of culture from the four does the company have. A very important question that comes to mind is, how do employees learn about the organizational culture? How do new people come in and learn about it? Well, we know that one of the ways employees learn is symbols, right? These are objects or symbolic acts, something that non-verbally conveys meaning to others. And some of the other ways are stories that abound in an organization, organizational heroes, people whose accomplishments are touted across the organization. What kind of people does the organization really turn into heroes? Is it the people who are following macho culture, or is it the people who are really hardworking, or is it the people who are very innovative? Who are the heroes of the organization? What are the different rituals that the company really engages in? What are the important occasions for the organization? What are the parties that are really sacred? What functions are really sacred? And then the most important way employees learn culture is through socialization. The process by which people, new employees especially, learn norms and required behavior and values. A lot of times they will be explicitly told this is the value of the organization. So when you're hired by an organization, a lot of times you go through orientation. Orientation will help employees understand the culture of the organization. And to that point, an important question is the question of PO fit, or person organization fit. What is this idea? PO fit. Well, it reflects the extent to which your personality, or the person's personality and values, match the climate and culture in an organization. We've seen organizations are becoming more and more cognizant of hiring people who fit into their value system. So if you've watched Patagonia's videos, you've seen Patagonia has very distinct culture, a culture that encourages sustainability, culture that encourages individual responsibility towards the planet, towards personal values, high ethical standards. And so Patagonia is very cognizant that they want to hire someone who has a high ethical compass, who strongly believes in the same core values that Patagonia does. Why? Why is that important? Well, think about your own examples. Those of you who have worked or are working, if you have values that are very diametrically opposite from the company that you're working in, it does lead to feelings of dissatisfaction with the job. You know, the job becomes just another job, not somewhere that you enjoy going. You lose passion, you lose you're not engaged at work, and organizations don't want that. If I am a CEO of a company, I want my employees to be happy, to be passionate about what they're doing. And if they don't fit with the organization, it's going to hurt them, and it's going to hurt me too. So fit is something that a lot of organizations are starting to test people on in their selection process. So, you know, questions that managers might ask about your favorite movie, your favorite website, or oftentimes when I am applying for a job, I'm asked questions about, you know, what is my ideal workplace, to sort of see if I, as a candidate, would fit into this culture, or if I would be a bad fit, if I would be unhappy working in this organization. So important question is, can organizational culture be changed? You know, how? What are the ways companies can change organizational culture? Yes, organizational culture can be changed. I mean, think about it. If you look at big companies such as Wells Fargo, after their big ethical scandal, they've tried to turn themselves around. Yes, ethical or unethical behavior can be traced to organizational culture. Think about it. We talked earlier, how do people learn about organizational culture? Where does organizational culture come from? From the founder, from the top management team, from the way people in the top are behaving, the messages, overt or covert messages that they're giving to their employees. And so, can you change those things? Absolutely. Number of ways to do it. You know, one of the ways is top down. You know, management can make an effort and have appropriate responses to key instances. You know, if you have a company that is mired with unethical behavior, people are stealing all the time, maybe it's time for management to come down hard and start having a zero tolerance policy and set examples by not having a lax attitude towards theft. You know, you could change the design, physically change the way the company or the building is set up. You could also have a bottom-up approach to changing your organizational culture, when employees get together and decide that we want to change things. So there are myriad number of ways, and your book does a good job explaining there are different ways that organizational culture can be changed. But what's really important to understand is that organizational culture is really key to a company's success. You know, your culture can make or break your company's chances of succeeding. But apart from the culture, it's also the organizational structure that will determine whether your company succeeds. Your structure should help the culture, and the culture helps the structure. It's a very cyclical relationship. They are both feeding into each other. If you look at the clan, autocracy, hierarchy, and market, those four different kinds of organizational cultures, when we start looking at mechanistic and organic institutions, that will make a lot more sense to you how those cultures can be supported by the organizational design or structure, and how changing the structure of the organization can sometimes aid in changing the culture of the organization as well. So let's quickly go over org structure. You know, what is org structure? Pretty much it outlines who reports to whom and who does what, plain and simple, right? So a simple structure, let's go to a simple structure first quickly. I'm sorry for going for fast forward, but I want to talk about the simple structure first. A simple structure is just one owner with a secretary. That's it. Two people it's easy to understand. The administrative assistant or the secretary is reporting to the owner. There are very few simple structures around. So it becomes important to understand not just the other complicated structures, but also the common elements of an organization. So the first one to look at is just look at this organizational chart, and it outlines to you, what usually an organizational chart looks like. And this is something that you will see a lot of times. Some organizations will have it as soon as you enter their reception area. So the first element of an organizational structure is the distinction between line and staff, right? So the line professionals, if you look at this particular organizational chart, the solid lines from the top to the bottom are the line employees, and the dotted lines are the staff employees. So what's the difference? Well, line professionals are responsible for core business functions, and they have direct authority for decision making, and they have people reporting to them. Okay, staff employees, on the other hand, play very important support roles. They provide advice and recommendations and research to line members. So these are the people who are helping or supporting the line employees. So now, once you've understood these common features of organizational structures, let's look at some of the other common elements of organizational structure. The first two are really easy: common purpose and coordinated effort. Common purpose unifies employees or members and gives everyone an understanding of the organization's reason for existing. And coordinated effort, it helps coordination of individual efforts into group-wide effort, helps the organization achieve its goals. Division of labor. You look at the division of labor as arrangement of having discrete parts of a task done by different people. A lot of organizations believe in specialization, and division of labor helps specialization, or rather specialization helps division of labor. And we've often noticed that division of labor helps increase efficiency. So, people who have a CPA are going to be the ones responsible for accounting, and the people who have an HR certification are the people who are going to be responsible for HR decision making. That's a broad example of division of labor. The next concept is that of authority. First, the hierarchy of authority, which looks at control mechanisms for making sure the right people do the right things at the right time. And unity of command, which refers to the concept that a person or an employee should have one and only one boss. Now, as you go forward and look at hybrid structures and matrix structures, you will see more and more in the 21st century, unity of command is being broken. And the reason is a lot of the project-based work where people have two bosses to report to. A lot of you might have two bosses to report to, and they can sometimes be problematic. So in organizations where unity of command is broken, which means where an employee has more than one boss, it becomes really important for the organization to understand and clarify authority and duties. So let's look at authority first. Authority looks at rights inherent in a managerial position to make decisions, right? Who has authority, which means who is able to make decisions. When we say centralized authority, it means there are very small core group of people at the very top of the organization who make decisions. Most of the important decisions are made by these higher level managers. Decentralized authority means important decisions can be made by middle level and supervisory level managers. If you worked in retail and every time you had a customer come to you with a return and you had to call in your manager or the supervisor to process that return, chances are it's very centralized authority. But if you were trained and given the free rein to make decisions on returns up to, a lot of companies do up to a certain dollar amount, that means it's a decentralization of authority. when we talk about authority, decision making, we also talk about managing people and span of control. Span of control pretty much looks at or refers to the number of people reporting directly to a given manager. It could be a narrow span of control, anywhere from 1 to 5 people, or it could be a wide span of control, anywhere from 7 or 9 to sometimes we've seen 200 people reporting to a manager. What determines the span of control? The nature of the task and the culture of the organization. If the nature of the task is very routine, you can have a wide span of control, more number of people reporting to a manager. But if the nature of the task is very complicated and a manager is overseeing people with very varied specialties and very extremely complicated tasks, then you may need to have a narrow span of control. Now, that's not a hard and fast rule. It all is determined by the nature of the work and the corporate culture. Finally, let's look at the duties. What do we mean by duties? And, accountability, responsibility, and delegation. These are the 3 concepts that are really important. And a lot of times people confuse them. Accountability refers to managers' justification, right? So managers must report and justify work results to the managers above them. Everyone should be accountable to someone, which means answerable for their actions. A manager who makes a decision should be answerable to someone for why they did it, when they're doing it, how they're doing it. Responsibility is the obligation that a manager has to perform the tasks assigned to him or her, or rather, obligation, you have to perform the tasks assigned to you. Now, let's look at responsibility and accountability, right? You could delegate responsibility. So delegation is the process of assigning managerial authority and responsibility to employees lower to you, right? So as a manager, your responsibility is to make the schedule for everyone, the weekly rotation. What if you decide, you have so much on your hands already, let me delegate this to one of my employees who's the senior most employee, and you feel you can trust their judgment. So you've given them the responsibility, which means you've delegated the work to them. Who's responsible for this work? Well, the employee is, but who is accountable, answerable if something is wrong in that schedule? It is the manager. You only delegate responsibility. You do not delegate accountability. That's a very important distinction that I want all of you to remember. Once you've understood all these things, it's really fairly quick and easy to go through the different kinds of structures. So we talked about the simple structure. You look at basic structures, which are functional or divisional. Functional, plain and simple, where the organization is organized based on the different functions: marketing, finance, production, human resource. That's a functional structure. A divisional structure could be different kinds. Divisions based on product, right? So the first example that I have here is of a production house that's making motion pictures, music. It's a big production house. Well, they have a motion picture division or a TV division. They have a music division. Then they have a books and magazine division. So based on what products they have. Or you could have a geographic division. You could have a Western US division, Northern US division, or you could have the Asia division and the Europe division. So there's no hard and fast rule. Companies look at how they want to base this basic structure based on their needs and how big they are. The next type, and these are the important ones that I want you to pay a little bit more attention to, are the matrix structure and the horizontal structure. So let's look at the matrix structure first on the left. The matrix structure is an organization where an organization combines functional and divisional chains of command in a grid so that there are 2 command structures, vertical structure and horizontal structures. Why does that happen? Well, it happens because more and more companies these days are working on a permanent project basis. So the example that I have here is of Ford Motor Company, and they have these different cars or different vehicles that are teams and projects in and of themselves. And each of these vehicles needs an engineer, someone who is responsible for finance, someone who's responsible for production and operations, and someone who's responsible for the marketing of the product. But then the company might have a functional structure as well. And so each of these people is permanently working in that team, but they're also permanently part of their division or the functional unit. And so they are reporting to two bosses, and in which scenario it's really important for the company to clearly outline the authority, responsibility, and unity of the authority and the responsibility for each of the bosses that an employee reports to. Oftentimes, people get confused between the matrix structure and the horizontal structure. One of the big differences between the two is that a matrix structure is a permanent grid structure where an organization has both functional structure and divisional chain of commands. In a horizontal structure, teams or work groups, either temporary or permanent, are used to improve collaboration and work on shared tasks by breaking down internal boundaries. And that's a big difference, that there isn't any grid, there isn't any matrix. There's a lot of teams and work groups are working and collaborating. More often it is temporary, could be permanent as well, but big difference is there is no grid there. And chances are that for lower level team members, the unity of command isn't broken. The next type of structure is hollow versus modular structure. The hollow structure is one where the organization has a central core of key functions and outsources all the other functions to vendors who can do them cheaper or faster, right? So all non-core operations are outsourced. So for example, accounting, HR, legal, company outsources all of these and says, well, we're very good at making ice cream and we're only going to make ice cream, or we're really good at developing an app and we're only going to develop an app. So it's a hollow structure. A modular structure differs from the hollow structure in that it is oriented around outsourcing certain pieces of a product rather than outsourcing certain processes, right? So in a modular structure, a firm assembles product chunks or modules provided by outside contractors. Work is done outside of the company. So modular structure, a firm assembles. There is no core function. The company pretty much has chunks or module provided by outside contractors, brings them together, puts them into a coherent product. That's a modular structure. So finally, let's look at the factors that are responsible or that help in creating the best structure, right? First important one is mechanistic versus organic. Really important to understand. Mechanistic organizations are organizations that could be similar to hierarchical organization. They are very centralized. They have a lot of centralized hierarchy of authority, a lot of rules, a lot of specialization, and they're very formal communication. An organic organization, on the other hand, will be an organization similar that may have an autocracy culture where there's a lot of innovation that happens. But innovation can only happen if the organization doesn't have too many rules and procedures. And if the organization has decentralized decision-making. Why? Why does decentralized decision-making help in quicker decision-making? Because think about it. If you are an employee, first line supervisor or a first non-supervisory employee, and there's a problem that you face or something happens, if there's centralized decision making, you have to wait to report it to your boss, and then the boss tries to figure out the solution, then comes back and tells you, and then you apply it. Versus if you have the authority to make the decision, right when you face the problem, you can quickly change tactics and adapt, or we call it adaptive task performance. You can create new ways of doing things, creative task performance. And so decentralized decision-making really helps respond quickly to the environment. So if you're a company that really values innovation and creativity, you will need to have an organic structure where there are very few rules and procedures. there's a wider span of control, and tasks are shared. There's not a lot of specialization, and there's a lot of informal communication as well. But if you are a company that has to follow a procedure, that has, mandates, or let's say you are a company that's working in the legal industry, you may have to be a mechanistic organization because you want to make sure people are following procedure, people are following process. A lot of manufacturing industries, especially the ones that are engaged in total quality management or Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, those companies maintain a mechanistic organizational structure. That's really good for them as well. The second factor that determines organizational structure is going to be the environment, right? What kind of environment is this company in? And even what kind of an environment the company has. Differentiation is the impulse towards dispersal. And so, for example, a company producing dental floss, deodorants, or other personal care products may have a different product division, each with its own production facility and sales staff. So tendency of the parts of an organization to be different and specialized. A good example could be Netflix's DVD subscription service, which is a completely different division than Netflix's instant streaming, and they don't necessarily have a lot of collaboration between the two or integration. Talking about integration is the tendency of the parts to draw together to achieve a common purpose. And this means the means for achieving this are usually formal chain of command, standardization of rules and procedures, and use of cross-functional teams, which is very important. Cross-functional teams and tech really help in integration, because you want to have more collaboration. And this is usually in companies where collaborative work is important, where teamwork is important, where project-based work is the norm. And a lot of times they may be creating or engaged in innovation. The final factor is an important factor, which is there has to be some sort of congruence between strategy, culture, and structure. Whatever your strategy is, so if you think about it, organizational culture and organizational structure should be aligned with its mission, vision, strategy. And if a manager changes the strategy of the organization, they will need to look at the culture and structure to support it. It's really foolhardy to assume that one day you could be an organization that follows rules and procedures, and the next day you decide we are going to focus on innovation, but we won't change anything else. That won't help. Remember, your structure and your culture, can make or break your chances of success. And so if your culture and your structure do not align with your company's mission and your company's strategy, it will end up in disaster. In the same vein, as companies grow, the culture and structure needs to grow with it. How many of you have seen stories of companies, great companies, they started as startups, and they were really amazing, and they were great as startups, but as they grew, they actually started to fail. And one of the reasons is that they underestimate how much their culture and their structure will have to change as they grow, because now the environment is changing. The forces that are within the organization and in the environment are changing as well. And so it's really important every step of the way to look at your company and analyze, does the company culture, the corporate culture, and does my structure support my vision? Does it support my strategy? Because otherwise, you might as well not have a culture in the organization or structure, right? So those they're key features of achieving strategy and goal. So that's it. This is the end of chapter 8. As always, please feel free to send me any questions that you might have about this chapter. Until then, and until the next chapter, this is goodbye.